Hi and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus, and today I want to talk about the truth of two-factor authentication, or 2FA. Now, 2FA has been on everyone's minds recently quite a bit. I wrote an article about it, which I'll link to down in the description. Many websites, including PayPal, are apparently going to require two-factor authentication if you want to keep your account and continue using it going forward. So the question is, what's actually going on with two-factor authentication? And there are three primary things that you need to bear in mind. The first is that two-factor authentication is not some sort of magical security solution that's going to fix all of our problems. In fact, it is very often not secure at all. The second thing you need to keep in mind is that very often two-factor authentication is kind of reducing our privacy a bit, which is not very pleasant. And finally, you really need to understand exactly how logins to websites work in order to understand the first 2 points. So I'll cover that in a minute, but first let's cover very quickly the different types of two-factor authentication. So the first type is 2FA by SMS. You receive an SMS on your phone, it gives you a little code, you type your password in and your code, and that logs you into the website. We're all pretty familiar with this because it's the most popular. The second type is using an authentication app. It's an app you can install on your laptop, your desktop, your smartphone, your tablet, whatever. It's just an application, and it generates a time-limited code after you set it up with whatever website or online service you're using it for. It generates a time-limited code, and that code can be used along with your password to help you sign in. And finally, we have the security key version, the hardware version of two-factor authentication, such as this Google Titan security key. I'll talk a little bit more about these in a second, but it turns out this is actually the most secure option. Okay, so 2FA via SMS to your phone. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a smartphone or a dumb phone. You can receive an SMS message with a code in it on any kind of phone. The problem with SMS two-factor authentication is that it is inherently insecure. The SMS protocol itself is not secure at all. And it was not so long ago that Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, his Twitter account was taken over even though he had two-factor authentication enabled on it. And this was done by a SIM swap attack, which is a very complicated thing where the hackers somehow managed to contact his cellular service provider and convince them to switch his account over to their phone instead of his, and they accepted it, so then boom, they got the SMS on their phone with his number, and poof, they were logged into his account and posting not very nice things. Now, you're probably thinking, right, but Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey would be targeted, but I wouldn't. But it turns out there are other weaknesses in the SMS system that we all know and love, and one of them is called an SS7 attack. SS7 is kind of the protocol used for SMS messages, and this is a type of attack where no one has to make any phone calls and get your cell phone switched over. All they need to do is essentially use some tools to hack into a local part of the SMS network, and they can actually intercept SMS messages intended for you, thereby getting the SMS code, and boom, they're logged in as you. There have been many attacks on the SMS system over the years, and so 2FA by SMS is just not very safe. Second, you have authentication apps. Now, authentication apps are more secure than SMS-based 2FA, but unfortunately they're still vulnerable to something called a man-in-the-middle attack. So real quick, what is a man-in-the-middle attack? So here we have a browser on the left, and you just go to website.com, and what happens? Well, the servers on the internet for website.com return the web page for you, and boom, there you go, there's the login page. You type your login and password, you log in, you're done. This is how it normally works. Now, with a man-in-the-middle attack, what happens is usually you receive, say, an email, and that email looks like it's from website.com. But it's actually not. It's an email that looks like it's from website.com, but it's actually from a hacker. So when you click the link in the email, your browser actually goes to websites.com, which is not exactly the same domain name. So how this works is because you are not going to the actual domain, website.com, you are going to websites.com, you are actually connected to the evil server, the hacker server, who is essentially the man in the middle. His server then actually gets the content from the real website.com and passes it off back to you. Now, the problem with this is that when you actually type any data in, everything going between your computer and website.com's actual servers, it's all passing through the hacker, who is the man in the middle. Hence, that's where we get the name from, and as you'll see in a minute, that means that the man in the middle can intercept your login cookie, which means he can then impersonate you. Well, what about one of these hardware keys, these security keys? These are actually the best. And one of the reasons they're the best is because they will often try to validate the actual domain name, the name of the website, so that if a hacker actually sends a link to you and you click on it and it takes you to websites.com with an S on the end, and it tries to actually intercept your two-factor authentication using the security key, it won't work because this guy, the real website, has to actually send identifying information to this guy before he will release the secret code to log you in. Now, it's not entirely secure because Citibank actually had some business customers that had hardware keys like this. This was way back in 2006, so it was technically the earlier days. And despite the fact that their customers were using hardware keys, there was still a man-in-the-middle attack, and it actually worked. Now, many things have changed since then, so generally speaking, hardware security keys are the best option. They are still the most secure. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that an SMS message is free, and authentication apps are often free, but these hardware keys usually are going to set you back $40 or $50. So they are a more costly option, but they are the most secure. Now, there are a few other issues to keep in mind when it comes to using two-factor authentication. You shouldn't just assume that because you're using a password plus 2FA that suddenly you're secure. So one of the problems here is that very often you use an online website or service, and it'll say, okay, do you want me to trust this device? Or perhaps by default, after you log in on a particular computer or your smartphone, for example, the online site or service will trust that device. Now, in order to have maximum security, you shouldn't do that. You should actually turn that off if possible. This makes 2FA login even more annoying because it means you're going to have to use your SMS or your authentication app or your hardware key every single time you want to log in. But the problem with services actually trusting your device is that if you actually have any malware on your computer, then once you're logged in, you have a login cookie, and that login cookie is going to be sent to the remote site or service, and you are essentially logged in. So if you have any malware on your computer, that computer can essentially log in as you. So it's not always ideal to trust devices. Now, having said that, many services such as Google and Twitter, when they detect a login from, say, a different geographical location or an IP address that varies wildly from your normal one, they'll actually send you an email, and it'll say, hey, somebody from Peru is trying to log into your account. If this wasn't you, click here. It's very important that you make sure that those emails do not end up in your junk folder, because that is one of the primary means by which your account stays secure and one of the ways by which you can prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. And very often here, the problem is not a weakness in the technology, it's actually a weakness in the people. It's essentially social engineering. If I can get you to actively click on a link that is not going to the actual website you want, but it's going to my malicious server, I can actually subject you to a man-in-the-middle attack. And one of the simple things you can do is, like, say you get a message from Facebook. You get an email from them, and it's got a link in it, and the text of the link says facebook.com/whatever. If you hover your mouse cursor over that, you'll see the URL, usually at the bottom of the screen, and if that URL doesn't match facebook.com, if it says, billybobserver.net, then obviously that email was not sent from Facebook, even though it looks like it was. So hackers basically go fishing, and they try to get you to click on things that look authentic but are not. And it's very important to actually notice these things and pay attention. Very often these emails will say something like, oh my God, your account is insecure, blah, 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 and they try to actually hook you via emotional language so that you freak out and click the link, and then they've got you, because once that man-in-the-middle attack has started, you're actually looking at a site that looks 100% genuine to you, but it's not. Fortunately, many man-in-the-middle attacks are poorly done, so for example, the text on the page will be in like really poor English, or whatever. There'll be some indication. So you have to actually be very careful and pay close attention to what you're doing. If you get a random, text message or email or whatever, or a phone call where someone is asking you for some information related to your account, you don't ever give it out, because the actual company will not do that. Or if they do, they'll do it in such a way that they're going to confirm for you that it's actually them. So social engineering is kind of the biggest problem here when it comes to two-factor authentication. The humans are the weak link. So the deal with login cookies is that none of these two-factor authentication mechanisms mean anything if a hacker can get a hold of your login cookie. So what the heck is a login cookie and how does it work? So here we are, you have your browser, you've loaded website.com, you have the website.com servers sitting over there on the internet, and obviously, as you can see in your browser, you've loaded their login page. So you enter your information in. When you do that, your login data is actually sent to website.com. Now, login data can include only a password, or it can include two-factor authentication, it can include 27 factors. You can include your fingerprint and all kinds of other stuff. It doesn't really matter. It's just whatever data you need to provide to website.com to log into that site. Now, when you are successfully authenticated by website.com, it sends you back whatever the logged in web page is, but it also sends you a cookie back. You get a cookie from the server. Now, as you can see on website.com, it says, "Welcome back, Bob." So there you are, and you can see that your browser now has the cookie that the server sent you, and the website.com server is also storing a copy of that cookie. So now what happens if you click a link on this website, it will actually send a GET request. It will say, "Hey, get me page 24." But when the browser actually sends that GET request, it's going to send your login cookie along with the request for, say, page 24. And what website.com is going to do is it's going to say, okay, it looks like somebody wants page 24. Well, oh, hang on a second. The GET request actually has a login cookie with it, so let me compare that to the cookie I have on file. Ah, yes, that is Bob. So I know that this user is Bob and he is logged in, so I can give him page 24 as a logged in user. And so that's all a login cookie is. It's yet another secret code, and after you log into a website, that code is sent to your browser, and your browser sends that code back to only the specific website that you logged into, not to any others. And that's essentially the key that says, "I am logged in." Now, as I said, it doesn't matter if you log into the site with just a password or SMS 2FA or even a security key. The point is that if I'm a hacker and I get some malware on your computer, or if I have physical access to your computer, if I do something that gives me access to that crazy string of letters and numbers that usually form a cookie, if I get your login cookie for that website, I can take that chunk of text and actually put it in my own browser, and poof, when I load that website, when I go to website.com, I'm logged in as you. So now there are various security mechanisms in browsers and such that try and dissuade hackers from doing this. But the point is that if anyone gets a hold of your login cookie, no matter how secure the login process is, you're screwed. So you can't just be concerned about only how you're logging in and only the type of two-factor authentication you're using. You also have to sort of have best security practices, and if you log in on some kind of public computer system or at an airport, don't forget to log out. It's generally a good idea to log in and log out of websites especially if you're using, say, like a mobile device. You don't want your mobile phone to be stolen and it has all your login cookies stored on it. Or, you can kind of think about it and figure it out for yourself. But the point is that it's not just a question of which 2FA should I use and then poof, I'm done. Even when you have something like an online bank account, it's going to have a login cookie, and if anyone gets that cookie, they're logged in as you. They have full access to your account. Now, typically cookies are time limited, especially for things like banks and other financial institutions, online trading. Those will be very time limited cookies. Other websites, they track IP addresses, they track your geographic location. There are various other security measures in place. But the one thing that you do not want is for someone to get that login cookie, and man-in-the-middle attacks, for example, are a wonderful way to get that cookie so that people can impersonate you. So, of course, if two-factor authentication is not really this wonderful thing that's going to save all of us from, all of our security woes and data leaks, then why is it being pushed so much? Well, as I mentioned, SMS-based 2FA, which is the most popular and being pushed the most, it's well known that it's not very secure. Back in 2018, there was a Reddit data leak. Their employees were using SMS-based two-factor authentication, and some hackers somehow managed to hack the account of one of the employees. That employee had access to data from Reddit, user data from way back in 2007, and the hacker then dumped all of that user data, that private user data, onto the internet, and oops, Reddit said, oh, oops, sorry, guess everybody should change their password. And this was way back in 2018. There was also the Jack Dorsey thing. So you might wonder, well, why is everyone pushing, especially SMS-based 2FA, when it's not exactly terribly secure? Well, we also learned way back in 2018, Facebook admitted that a bunch of their users were using SMS-based 2FA, and they finally admitted that, well, we've been taking your phone numbers and using it for advertising purposes. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Some sites are encouraging their users to use two-factor authentication, so you say, great, let me use Authy, an authentication app. And they'll say, wait, first I need to confirm it's you, so please give me your phone number and I'll send you an SMS with a code, and when you give me that code, then I'll let you use Authy, an authentication app, or a hardware security key. But before they allow you to use either of those, they must have your phone number. Now, you can imagine why they want your phone number, because of course, if you're logged into, say, Amazon, and they only have my email address, but they don't have my phone number, well, of course they want my phone number, because that's extra marketing information. It's advertising information. Once they have my phone number, maybe they'll send me a text message saying, hey, you shop at Amazon, why don't you use our Amazon app? And of course they want me to use the Amazon app, because the Amazon app runs natively on my smartphone. And of course it has access to all the sensors, the accelerometer, and my location data, and all that sort of thing, so they can hoover up even more data. When apps, things like simple weather apps, are actually hoovering up all your location data and then essentially selling it to the highest bidder, of course everyone wants your phone number, because they want more data about you, they want to track you more, and essentially they want to invade your privacy. Now you might think, well, yeah, but it's not really a big deal. It's kind of like, people say, well, don't share your location on your Android smartphone, or your Android smartphone, it's sharing my location even if I don't allow it to. They're still hoovering up all kinds of data. Yeah, but who cares? Because, it's like my cell phone can be triangulated. And that's sort of a point, but there's a but, and it's a rather big one. It's not exactly technically easy to triangulate the position of a cell phone. You need to triangulate. You need 3 different antennas and positions, blah, blah, blah. You would need to sort of hack into the cellular system, or you need to have false base stations, or you need to have a fair amount of technical know-how, and it's not super easy to triangulate the precise location of a person. When you have a smartphone and you're carrying it around with you, and it's hoovering up all that location data and sending it off to everybody, including random companies that are selling that data, your weather app is selling it to the highest bidder. This is something where it's happening 24/7, it's happening all the time, and you have essentially agreed to it. So it's not a question of, well, it could happen anyway with this more complicated method, so I'll just not care about it. It's like, why wouldn't you want to take simple steps to minimize the privacy invasion, to minimize the amount of personal data that anyone can hoover up about you? You just take a few simple precautions and you minimize it. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to two-factor authentication, do not use the SMS variant, because yes, it is safer than using just a password, especially if you use passwords like password 123. But SMS-based 2FA is the least secure, and it has already been proven repeatedly over the years that it's not much better than having a password. Authentication apps are an excellent option. They're free, they run on any device, and they are more secure if you are paying close attention and avoiding things like man-in-the-middle attacks. And of course, the most secure is the hardware key, but it actually costs you money. So, right, and at the end of the day, of course, Yes, it's going to increase security a little bit, but there are other reasons. Everyone wants your data, and one of the ways they're going to get it is by forcing you to give them your phone number, and hopefully to get access to your smartphone and all its wonderful sensors. So that is the interesting truth about two-factor authentication. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.